All right, so one of the first concepts that I want to quickly run through is the concept of having a movement hierarchy. And this is simply having a hierarchy of areas or positions that require more work or have a higher level of importance to allow you to achieve a skill. So we have the hierarchy here. And first of all, I want to explain that training the movement in many cases is one of the last things you want to do. All right. So at the top of the hierarchy here, we have mobility. So I'm going to give you an example of the squat, for example. So if you cannot squat, i.e. if you don't have the mobility to get to parallel in the squat, then your squat doesn't really mean a whole lot. So you can't be skillful in a position that you can't achieve. And mobility is the most important area that we need to work on, okay? Once we have the mobility, everything becomes an awful lot easier, because the only resistance we should have is the weight on our back if we're doing a squat. If we're resisting our body as well, because our body just can't find that position through whatever issue it is, whether it's a neurological issue, whether it's a joint capsule issue, whatever it is in terms of the mobility side of things, if that's working against our body as well, then we are trying to push shit uphill essentially, okay? So the first thing that we want to do is we want to look at addressing mobility. So coming back into handstands, all right? If we can't bring our arms overhead and find this position while maintaining a dish without our lower back arching, then it tells us that we have a mobility issue. So the common areas that we're looking at here are lats, wrists, T-spine, okay? So we have to spend a long period of our training, or I certainly did when I started, cleaning up all this business first, all this mobility. So then once we have looked after mobility, we have to focus on stability. So we want to be stable in that position, because if we're not stable in that position and we kick up into a handstand, then it's going to mean that our bodies are shifting forward or backwards, and we're going to have to keep adjusting that position, and it's going to find it an awful lot harder to stick and maintain the handstand. So mobility and stability are the two important areas that we focus on, okay? Once we've achieved that, then we look at position. We use the wall for this, or we can spot for this, and at this point we focus on like posture and our position, and then the last time is the movement, all right? Once we have mobility, stability and position to look after, we then train the movement. And what we must realize with handstands is that there are loads of little micro movements occurring when we're holding a handstand. So we're going to talk about this later on in our handstand training, but essentially when we're on our hands, our fingers are moving all the time to help us readjust, because when we breathe, we have these little micro movements that are going on, and these little corrections that are constantly happening. So then we have the movement. But what happens with a lot of people is they go straight into the movement, okay? And they're constantly just trying to kick up and down out of handstand, and essentially they're 6 months later, you see them in the very same position, and 12 months later, they're very same position with their journey, because they have not looked after this one in particular, and then this one, and they're never really going to progress as quickly as they could. And the same applies for every other movement as well. Even if we go back to the squat, people put like shitloads of weight on the bar, and they just try to squat loads of weight without being stable, without being mobile, and without having a good understanding of the position. And what happens? They hurt themselves and they get injured, and they come at it from this area up. And when they get injured, then they decide to get a rehab program, because they have to go to a physio, and then they decide to go working on their mobility, their stability and their position, but only after they've had a big fuck up through an injury. So the approach that we want to take is we want to follow this movement hierarchy and work from the top down, okay? So that's the movement hierarchy. And that's the approach that we're going to take when we focus on our handstands, but not just our handstands, when we focus on any movement or any new skill.